Good morning, Rosny Church family. It's so great to be here with you this morning. And thank you very much for your very warm welcome. I love coming and visiting here at Rosny. I loved the children's story, and I wrote down, I've got to remember, oh, no, I don't have to remember it, I wrote it down, the marimba. I was fascinated by how that was played, so I've written that down so I can go home and have a look at that, and I'm sure it will be magnificent. So it was great to take a journey through all of those different musical instruments. So I am here today on behalf of ADRA. So I'm the Regional Manager for ADRA in Tasmania. And for those that aren't familiar with ADRA, ADRA stands for the Adventist Development and Relief Agency. And I guess it's the humanitarian arm of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. And so I'm just going to share a message with you today about one of the words on my T-shirt here. So I'm going to be sharing about justice today. But before I do that, I just want to mention, I guess, a few things that are happening with ADRA. So locally, ADRA operates 2 op shops in Tasmania. And those op shops, so one is based at Glenorchy and the other one is in Ulverston, so up in the northwest of Tasmania. And those op shops provide the funding for the different projects that happen in Tasmania. And up in the northwest, which is where I'm based, we have a couple of projects. So we have the Northwest Emergency Food Relief Project. And so that runs a food pantry in Waratah. Has anybody here heard of Waratah? Yep, so it's a really isolated little community down in the down the west coast. So we have people that travel from Burnie and Wynyard churches down there each week to run the food pantry. But there's also a wonderful little group of local volunteers that help run that food pantry down there. And then there's also food deliveries from Burnie, Wynyard and Smithton churches do some different food deliveries to people in need in their communities. And then in Devonport we have a cooking and food literacy program. And so that's working with people in the community to help develop their skills about how to use food and how to budget and use different ingredients, and that's a real blessing to the people involved in that. And some of the stories that I'm hearing about the changes it's making in people's lives in like dealing with diabetes or even just experiencing new foods that maybe they wouldn't have experienced without being involved in the cooking and food literacy program. So there are 2 ADRA projects, but then down south there's a church-led and ADRA-supported project at Margate Church, and so that's another food pantry. And I know I haven't caught up recently, but I know that the men's group from Rosny has also been involved with ADRA, and that's supported, ADRA has in the past supported the work that happens with some of the men's group's activities here as well. So that's locally a little bit about what's happening, and I've got a few churches that are working on putting together or have put together some project ideas, and so there will be new projects starting in Tasmania in the very near future. But I'm really excited. I'm heading over to Avondale in a couple of weeks' time to meet up with all of the ADRA regional managers from around the country, because we're looking at a program, and I don't know whether it's been spoken about in the different churches yet, but the Mission Ready program. And so this is something that's being rolled out across the South Pacific, and so it's getting ready for, I guess, helping churches to get ready for the South Pacific Division for Christ initiative. And so we've seen that happen in PNG, and we know that's coming up in Australia in a couple of years' time. And so Mission Ready is a program that ADRA and the South Pacific Division are working on together, that's looking at trying to get a project, a community-based project happening in each church. And so I know some churches are already set up and doing that, but there's other churches where there's the opportunity to do that, or it might be something that another group of people in the same church goes, yep, And so it's trying to put together all of those resources so that people that are interested in running something in their community, they can just pick them up and go. You don't have to start from scratch. So I'll be talking a lot more about that once I come back from my meetings in a couple of weeks and I know a little bit more about it. So watch out for that through our church bulletins and other communications, because I'll be, I'm pretty excited about what we've got happening there. And then at a national level, I hope that people have seen this picture and heard a little bit about this story from ADRA. So this is a lady called Rebecca, so she's been the face of ADRA's End of Financial Year campaign. And Rebecca is a mother. She has kids, and she's living in in a situation where she has to make a choice each day about deciding whether to spend money on food or whether to spend money on sending her kids to school. And so a lot of the time that they only have 2 meals a day, and a couple of the kids weren't able to attend school, but through ADRA's project, so I work for the national project, so what happens in Australia, but ADRA also has an international team as well. And so this is one of the international projects, and through being involved in ADRA's program, she's been able to grow a business that has allowed her to now make more money, earn more money, and all of her kids are in school. And I love the video. I don't know whether people got an opportunity to see the Mission News video, but it was about, I can't remember which country in Africa it was from, but it was a beautiful story about a school that was set up by women's ministries and rescues young girls that are in need of help. And right at the end, they said, each girl they save, it doesn't just, change their life, it changes the future. Because it's not just them, it's any of their kids, like what they do for the rest of their life is changed because of this school that's been set up to help them. And so that's the same, whether it's, donating money towards a project at that ADRA runs, or whether it's helping somebody in your local community. You change their life at the moment, but you also change their future. And I'm going to be talking about that today, so I guess whenever I come and talk about ADRA, it is going to be a call to action, because that's what ADRA is about. It's about helping people in the community. So end of financial year, it's a really important campaign for ADRA because it funds a lot of the projects that happen through the year. So we do have different offerings during the year. So one's a disaster and famine relief offering, but this one is to help fund some of those national and international programs that are providing support. So if you haven't already donated, we would appreciate your donations towards that campaign. So now into what I would like to share with you today. So ADRA has the motto of justice, compassion and love, which I'm sure you would see on my t-shirts and anything to do with ADRA. Last year when I was here, I spoke about compassion. This year I have chosen to speak about justice, and so if I get to visit the year after, guess what we're going to be chatting about? So going to be talking about justice today. And the key Bible verse that I want to share with you today, or the one that sort of encapsulates what I'm going to be sharing with you today, and I have jumped ahead too far, is Micah 6:8. And so I have loved this Bible verse for a long time. It's just a beautiful picture of our relationship with God. And so Micah 6:8 says, "He has shown you, O mortal, what is good. And what does the Lord require of you? To act justly and to love mercy and to walk humbly with your God." So I just love the simplicity of that message about what God requires from us: to act justly, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with him. So we're going to be looking today a little bit about what does it mean to act justly. And so I want to start off by asking, about the word justice. And I want to ask you to just take a moment to think about what the word justice means to you. And once you've had a little bit of a think about it, please turn to the people that are around you and share what the word justice means to you. Okay, is anybody willing to share something that they discussed about the word justice and what it means to you? Please don't be shy. Sorry? Equitable, yep. Anything else? Fair outcomes, yep. Righting the wronged? Yep. Anything else that people discussed? Freedom? Yep. So you can see that justice, the word justice, is not a simple word to define, and it means different things to different people. When I first started thinking about justice and what justice means, these are sort of the things, I was thinking about. Does justice mean getting what we deserve? Does it mean an eye for an eye? So we hear that, that mentioned in terms of justice in the Bible, it means an eye for an eye. Is it making sure that bad people are punished? And then I started thinking a bit more about it, and this image came to mind. So does anybody recognise these photos? Yeah? So this is from back in the 1960s, Martin Luther King Jr. and the I Have a Dream speech. And so this was his vision for people of America and equality. And I just want to share a little bit about this, a little bit from this speech. And so he said, and I don't have the start of this speech, so this is part way through, but he says, 50 years ago, a great American in whose symbolic shadow we stand today signed the Emancipation Proclamation. This momentous decree is a great beacon of light, of hope to millions of Negro slaves who have been seared in the flames of withering injustice. It came as a joyous daybreak to end the long night of their captivity. But 100 years later, the Negro is still not free. 100 years later, the life of the Negro is still badly crippled by the manacles of segregation and the chains of discrimination. 100 years later, the Negro lives on a lonely island of poverty in the midst of a vast ocean of material prosperity. 100 years later, the Negro is still languished in the corners of American society and finds himself in exile in his own land. We cannot walk alone, and as we walk, we must make the pledge that we shall always march ahead. We cannot turn back. There are those who are asking the devotees of civil rights, when will you be satisfied? We can never be satisfied as long as the Negro is the victim of the unspeakable horrors of police brutality. We can never be satisfied as long as our bodies, heavy with the fatigue of travel, cannot gain lodging in the motels of the highways and the hotels of the cities. We cannot be satisfied as long as the Negro's basic mobility is from a smaller ghetto to a larger one. We can never be satisfied as long as our children are stripped of their adulthood and robbed of their dignity by signs stating for whites only. We cannot be satisfied as long as the Negro in Mississippi cannot vote and the Negro in New York believes he has nothing for which to vote. No, no. We are not satisfied, and we will not be satisfied until justice rolls down like waters and righteousness like a mighty stream. So this was part of his vision for justice, and that word equality comes out, and fairness. And I just want to take a moment to talk about this concept of equality and fairness, because like justice, it's a little bit more complex than what we might think. So when we think about equality and fairness, we might say they're pretty much the same thing. Right? But I want to give you an example of so we've got this little community in Rosny. So this church is a little community, and you have a village green where you grow all your food. Now, this is Tasmania, and so everybody knows that Tasmanians love their potatoes, love their spuds. So that's all you grow. So you grow your spuds, and everybody in your community is involved in growing them. And when they come to be harvested, they are shared equally. Right? So it's all you eat, and each person gets 4 potatoes a day. Right? In the community. So we'll all agree that's equal. Every person in the community gets 4 potatoes a day to live on. Okay. But you have somebody who is a 6'4" construction worker who goes out, big day of work, they get their 4 spuds, and you have a 2-year-old that, very active in that, but they never eat all of their 4 spuds. So it's equal, but isn't necessarily fair. And so when we think about justice and equality and fairness, we need to think about the needs of the people that we are serving, in terms of, do we need to be equal, or do we need to make sure that things are fair for those people? And I might come back to that a little bit later, because there's another example if I've got a bit of time. But that's just something that I want to introduce that thought to you at the start. So I said this I Have a Dream speech took place back in the 1960s. And we know that things have changed since then. So a few things. So in 1940, 60% of unemployed black women worked as domestic servants. Today, and sorry, these numbers, I couldn't find any really up-to-date numbers with this, but these numbers are back, I think there was close to about 2000, so they're about 20 years old. That number is down to 2.2%, while 60% hold white-collar jobs. In 1958, 44% of whites said they would move if a black family became their next-door neighbour. Today, the figure is 1%. In 1964, the year the Great Civil Rights Act was passed, only 18% of whites claimed to have a friend who was black. Today, 86% say they do, while 87% of blacks assert they have white friends. So we can see that as a society, things have changed. But is it perfect? Does everybody have justice? Does everybody have equality? Is everything fair? We know around the world that there is still a lot of injustice. I'm just going to skip over this one because I come to that at the end. So when we look at justice, I've been talking about social justice. Other people, when I asked you to think about what justice means to you, you might have thought about legal justice or criminal justice. And then there's the concept of, and this happens to me every time I talk about this, I can't say the first word down the bottom. So restorative versus, I can say retribution, but I can't say retributive. For some reason, I just can't say that. And so there's a lot that surrounds justice. And when you get onto the internet and you start looking at justice and you say, well, where did justice come from? And the internet answers you that it evolved. So internet talks sometimes really useful, sometimes not. But we know that justice comes from God. It's a biblical concept. And when you go through your Bible and you look in the Old Testament, God had these amazing, rules in place for people to live by that helped make sure that there was equality and fairness in society. And so when you look at the rules about how long you could own, so if you took land in terms of payment for a debt or something, at some point that would be returned to you. And that was a way of God making sure that people, like at the moment in our world, we've got, this 1% of the world's population holds like 80% of the world's wealth. And this was God's way of going, no, if you follow these rules, and they'd have their year of Jubilee and things would be returned to their original owners, and it helped society to stay more equitable and fair. But we have moved so far away from that. But I want to spend a little bit of time today looking at what God says about justice. And so if you, so I do have all the Bible text, but please feel free to read in your Bible in the versions that you prefer. Because the Bible highlights how important justice is to God. So not just those rules that I was talking about there, but the concept of justice is sprinkled right throughout the Bible. So in Isaiah chapter 30 and verse 18 it says, "Therefore the Lord will wait, that he may be gracious to you. And therefore he will be exalted, that he may have mercy on you. For the Lord is a God of justice. Blessed are all those who wait for him." And Psalm 33:5 says, "He loves righteousness and justice. The earth is full of the goodness of the Lord." When I was thinking about justice in the Bible, like a lot of things came to mind, but there was one Bible story that really stood out to me in terms of what I thought that exhibited justice. So if you think for a moment about Bible stories in the Bible, which is where you'd expect to find Bible stories, if you think about stories in the Bible that give that example of justice, what springs to mind for you? Anything? Well, I'm going to surprise you with the story of King Solomon then. So I've got this in the contemporary English version because I like how it just tells the story, but please, as I said, feel free to follow along in the version that you prefer. So this story is told in 1 Kings chapter 3 and verses 16 to 28. First of all, I want to ask, what is King Solomon known for? His wisdom. Okay, so good person to have a look at least at the start of his kingdom. So it says, "One day 2 women came to King Solomon, and one of them said, 'Your Majesty, this woman and I live in the same house. Not long ago my baby was born at home, and 3 days later her baby was born. Nobody else was there with us. One night, while we were all asleep, she rolled over on her baby and he died. Then, while I was still asleep, she got up and took my son out of bed. She put him in her bed, then she put her dead baby next to me. In the morning, when I got up to feed my son, I saw that he was dead. But when I looked at him in the light, I knew he wasn't my son." It's a really tragic story that's being told in this chapter of 1 Kings. "No," the other woman shouted. "He was your son. My baby is alive. The dead baby is yours," the first woman yelled. "Mine is alive." They argued back and forth in front of Solomon until finally he said, "Both of you say this live baby is yours. Someone bring me a sword." So I can't imagine what was going through everybody's mind at this moment as they're standing there and they've watched this intense and emotional argument between these 2 women fighting over who was the mother of the live baby. And so a sword was brought, and Solomon ordered, "Cut the baby in half. That way each of you can have part of him." This concept of equality and fairness. He was being equal. Each person was going to get half a baby. "Please don't kill my son," the baby's mother screamed. "Your Majesty, I love him very much, but give him to her. Just don't kill him." The other woman shouted, "Go ahead and cut him in half, then neither of us will have the baby." Solomon said, "Don't kill the baby." Then he pointed to the first woman. "She is his real mother. give the baby to her. Everyone in Israel was amazed when they heard how Solomon had made his decision. They realised that God had given him wisdom to judge fairly. And I just want to share that last verse in the New King James Version, because it says, "And all Israel heard of the judgment which the king had rendered, and they feared the king, for they saw that the wisdom of God was in him to administer justice." So with the wisdom that God gave Solomon came that ability to administer justice. And so he had the wisdom in that story to work out a way of quickly telling which lady was the real mother of the baby. And I know when we read this story, if you haven't read it before, it sounds pretty harsh and dramatic that he was going to cut the baby in half. But it was just his wise way of going, I can figure out fairly simply who's the mother of this child. So when God gave Solomon wisdom, he gave him that wisdom to administer justice. And there's several places in the Bible where God calls on his leaders to have that wisdom to be able to administer justice. And so we go back to Micah chapter 3 and verse 1, which says, "And I said, hear now, O heads of Jacob, and you rulers of the house of Israel. Is it not for you to know justice?" So calling on all of the leaders of Israel to know justice. And so when we think about our role in our church and our conference and our division, there's a hope, and we should be praying for all of our leaders to be able to have that wisdom to know justice. And Proverbs 2:9 also says that. "Then you will understand righteousness and justice, equity and every good path." And I just like this verse a lot. So Micah 6:8, just the last part of it, to act justly and to love mercy. So to do justice, so do means do something, like it's an active word. Do justice. It occurs 25 times in the Bible. And I just want to share a couple of, actually I think there's a few more, because I keep on adding verses in, because they're so powerful about how God calls us to do justice or to be just. So Proverbs 21 and verse 3 says, "To do righteousness and justice is more acceptable to the Lord than sacrifice." So when we think about what that verse means, to me it means that God is calling us to do justice, not to just come along to church and sit here and go, well, we've kept the Sabbath and we've kept all of these different rules. He's saying to do justice is more acceptable than to come here and make those sacrifices that they were called on back in biblical times. In Deuteronomy 10:18 it says, "He administers justice for the fatherless and the widow and loves the stranger, giving him food and clothing." And I want you to think about the fatherless and the widow and the stranger there, because it's repeated fairly frequently. Isaiah 1:17 says, "Learn to do right, seek justice, defend the oppressed, take up the cause of the fatherless, plead the case of the widow." And in Deuteronomy chapter 27 and verse 19, it also mentions these. It says, "Cursed is the one who perverts the justice due to the stranger, the fatherless and the widow." And all the people shall say, "Amen." So I want you to think again for a moment. Who are the fatherless, the widows and the strangers? Why are they mentioned so frequently when God is talking about justice? Who did they represent in biblical times? Any thoughts? The vulnerable people, yep. So when you think about, in Bible times, you think about the fatherless, the widows and the strangers. They were the vulnerable people in society. They were people that didn't have a voice. They needed, so when we think about the widows, they needed a man to speak up for them. The fatherless, they didn't have a provider. The strangers in society, they didn't fit. So God was pointing these out repeatedly in the Bible as people that we need to do justice for. In Matthew 25, and I used this last year because it's just like really words to live by as... So Matthew 25 verse 40 says, "And the king will answer and say to them, Assuredly I say to you, inasmuch as you did it to one of the least of these, my brethren, you did it for me." So God's calling us and saying, I want you to do justice, and what you do to help the vulnerable people in our community, it's as if you were doing it for me, to me. So this one, it's changed the font a little bit, so things haven't fit on the screen exactly as I had them. But this question is, how are you going to do justice? How are you going to do what God has called us to do? 25 times in the Bible it says, do justice. And as you think about that for a moment, I just want to remind you of a couple of key principles in our Bible. So John 3:16, "For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whoever believes in him should not perish but have everlasting life." So it's a really well-known Bible text. Does it apply just to you? Does it apply just to the people sitting here in this church today? Or does it apply to everybody on the planet? It applies to every single person that's ever been born. God loves them so much. So the people that are driving by in their cars as we sit here worshipping today, the people that we pass in the street, the people that we go to work with, or the people that we go to school with, God loves every single one of them so much that he came to this planet to live and die for them. Luke chapter 12, verses 6 to 7 says, "Are not 5 sparrows sold for 2 coins? And not one of them is forgotten before God. But the very hairs of your head are all numbered. Do not fear, therefore, you are of more value than many sparrows." We're not just this sort of glump of people down here living on earth. We are an individual to God, so individual that he knows how many hairs are on our head. Now, I lost 53 in the shower this morning. God knows that. He knows us and he loves each one of us so much. And he wants us to do justice for people in our community that need help. So when we think about our world today, where is there injustice? Now I'm going to go back to where I started, where we were talking about the civil rights movements in America, and I said there have been improvements. But I've just got a couple of graphs here. And so this data goes up to 2020, and it shows that there's still a big gap between black people and white people in America in terms of just simple things like home ownership. When we look at the wealth divide, like I look at that graph and I look at the difference in terms of wealth. So this isn't income or anything, this is the wealth, so what people own. That's pretty dramatic between white and black people and Latino people. I was looking at this paper, long complicated title, but mortality disparities between black and white Americans. And it makes a few statements just in the introduction. And I'm just going to read the highlighted bits, but it says, in particular, black Americans experience significantly shorter life expectancies than non-Hispanic white Americans, with higher mortality rates linked to relatively earlier mortality from diabetes, cancer, cardiovascular disease, homicide and perinatal conditions. Mortality disparities experienced by black Americans are potentially driven by multiple interrelated forces, including socioeconomic disadvantages, racial discrimination and segregation, poorer access to healthcare, greater environmental pollution exposures, worse access to health promoting amenities, and practice of riskier health behaviours. This is in 2025, and the one that I've misplaced in my slides was around the mortality differences between black mothers and white mothers, so when they're giving birth. And there's a much higher number of black mothers that die during childbirth than there are white mothers. So this is in America, which is one of the most developed and rich countries in the world, that we still see these disparities in social justice. Afghanistan. So I was just reading over the past week about the increasing, and it was already difficult, but the increasing difficulties that women have in Afghanistan. And so in the news this week was that even though according to the law there is the ability for women to divorce their husbands if they are being abused, when they go to court they still have to get permission from their husband to get that divorce. And so in reality, even though the law might say they can divorce, if the husband says no, then they can't. And I've just got this story here. So this isn't related to women's rights. This is just a story about a family that was assisted by ADRA. And the guy that you can see there is a guy called Meh. And it says that he grew up along the route of the famous Silk Road, which once made its way through his home country of Afghanistan. With no formal education, he became a farmer and did extra field work for others to support his family. I had no major complaints in life, as life was simple and normal for me. But all too soon, Meh's simple life felt the effects of the war and poverty in his country. During the first Taliban regime, I lost one eye in active combat, he said, yet I continued my normal life and somehow managed to provide for my family despite incurring severe injuries and loss of an eye. Meh lost his second eye during a more recent conflict. My whole world turned black and miseries followed, he told us. After he recovered from his injuries, Meh's family was displaced from their home and moved into a cramped settlement in Kabul that Meh calls miserable. The settlement doesn't block out the bitter cold during the winter and lacks proper sanitation and hygiene measures. Meh's injuries and other health complications left the family in considerable debt. Medical debt can be an overwhelming obstacle for any family. For a displaced blind father who can no longer support his family in a country without a functioning economy, there is almost no way back. The family lost one son to COVID-19 but felt they had no choice but to send their only other son to Iran to look for work. Meh said they haven't heard much from the 16-year-old since he's been away, and they still have 4 daughters to support. Meh's wife works as a house cleaner for others, but the family has turned to desperate measures to survive. Every day people knock at my door and ask for money I owe them, said Meh. But no other option. I have no other option and offered to sell my young daughter to clear this. But those people declined the offer and asked for cash. Doctors have told Meh that the damage to one of his eyes is repairable and he could gain sight in that eye again. Unfortunately, the cost of the surgery is so far out of reach that it's not even a consideration for him. A teenage boy sent away to earn money, a little girl being offered to pay off debts, a life-changing surgery shrugged off. So that's just a story of one family and the injustice that they are living through, that through no fault of their own, and I'm not saying that even if it is our own fault that we shouldn't get help, but through no fault of their own, they're in this situation where they just don't have enough money to live. So that's, I guess, a couple of examples, one from a rich country, one from a poor country. But how do we fare in Tasmania? Is there injustice in Tasmania that we should be addressing when God's calling us to do justice? And so I am focusing on that social justice side of things. But when we look at Tasmania, and this is just one thing. So we have over 2,000 people who are homeless in Tasmania. Now that doesn't mean that there's necessarily 2,000 people living on the streets. 39% of homeless individuals are aged between 0 and 24. Only about 10% of the homeless population are living on the streets, and that might be reassuring to you that we don't have 2,350 people that don't have homes, but that doesn't mean that the other people they don't have security in terms of where they're living. So they are living in, doing couch surfing, which is pretty common for homeless young people. So in Tasmania, we have things that we should be addressing if we're going out there and doing justice like God calls us to do. So what can we do? Right? So there are so many things that we can do depending on our resources and our abilities. So one is simply, if we have a reasonable income, is supporting people that need help. So whether that's locally, whether that's around the country, whether it's internationally. But God doesn't just want us to go, okay, here's the money and then get on with our day. He wants us to be actively involved. He wants us to do justice. So I Googled mentoring young people. So God talks about the fatherless, right? So just in Tasmania, when you Google search, you come up with, I think there was more than this on the list, of these different youth mentoring programs that you could volunteer and help those who might be fatherless or motherless or just don't have good role models in their lives. And what you do to help change this person's direction of life, I like that one down the bottom, the opportunity to be the one that makes a difference. That's what God's calling us to do, to be the one that goes out there and does justice for someone. So someone that doesn't have a voice, somebody that's vulnerable in our community, and it doesn't matter where we look, there are people in need. So I really encourage you as an individual today and as a church family to think about, how are you doing justice in your community? How are you following God's command to do justice? Thank you all very much.